Chapter 10 of Inspector French's Greatest Case by Freeman, Wills, Crofts. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Read by Yoganand. Inspector French's Greatest Case, Chapter 10, Some Pairs of Blankets. During Inspector French's brief lunch hour, he continued turning over in his mind the immediate problem which Mr. William Story had raised for him, namely, at what point he had best attack his new inquiry. The fact postulated a good deal of obvious detailed investigation, and he felt he should carry this through in his usual systematic way before attempting to evolve a comprehensive theory of the crime. He had first learned what he could of the mysterious Mrs. Root, and in this connection he foresaw inquiries at Pittsburgh from the White Star people, from the Southampton police, at the Savoy, and at the various firms of jewelers to whom the checks had been made out. He had, if possible, to find the lady or an impersonator. These things accomplished, he could turn his attention to an attempt to connect the person found with Miss Duke, or at all events with Mr. Duke's jewels, and subsequently with the murder of Charles Getting. By the time his meal was ended, he had decided that he would commence operations at the Savoy, and 10 minutes later he turned into the courtyard and, making his way to the office, inquired for the manager. In due course he explained his business to the great man, but the latter shook his head when he heard what was required of him, and asked French for suggestions as to how he could help. "First I should like to see the register," French explained. "That at least is easily done." The manager led the way to the office and introduced French to the radiant young woman who presided at the reception counter. Then, turning over the pages of the register, he presently exclaimed, "That looks like it, Inspector, I fancy." The entry read, November 24, Mrs. Chauncey S. Root, Pittsburgh, USA 137. French drew out the checks he had obtained from Mr. Scarlett and carefully compared the signatures. "That's it," he declared. "There's no doubt those are in the same handwriting. Now the question is, can this young lady remember the woman?" The clerk hesitated. "We are a lot of Americans in that day," she said slowly, as she ran her eyes down the list of names. "It's not easy to keep track of them all. And this is 6 weeks ago." She paused again, then shook her head. "I'm afraid I can't just place her." "It was the day the Olympic got to Southampton," French prompted. "There would no doubt have been a number of people off the steamer special." He glanced once more at the book. "See, here is a crowd of Americans all together. Newark, Boston, Newark, Philadelphia, and so on. That represents the special. But—" he paused and ran his finger down the column. "Now this is really rather interesting. Mrs. Root's name is not among them. Here it is, down near the end of the list. That means she came in late in the evening, doesn't it? Does that help you at all, Miss Pearson?" He waited, but the girl not replying, he continued, "Or the room. Does number 137 bring anything to your mind?" The girl shook her pretty head. "Turn up the account, Miss Pearson," the manager suggested. The girl produced another huge book, and all three went through the items. Mrs. Root, it appeared, had paid for the rooms. Number 137 was a suite consisting of 1 bedroom, bathroom, and sitting room, for 3 nights, the 24th, 25th, and 26th of November. She had had 7 meals in the hotel, dinner on the night of arrival, and breakfast, lunch, and dinner on the next 2 days. All these meals she had had served in a private room. Avoiding publicity, French thought, continuing aloud, "Then she didn't breakfast on the morning she left?" At his remark, Miss Pearson gave an exclamation. "I remember now," she said. "It was your saying that brought her to my mind. No, she didn't breakfast the morning you mean, because she left on the previous night. I remember the whole circumstances now. She came in on the night," she glanced at the register, "of the 24th, pretty late, it was between 7 and 8, I should think, and asked me for a suit for 3 or 4 weeks. She was dark-haired and pale complexion and very American in her speech. I fixed her up with number 137, and she said she wanted dinner sent up to her room. 2 evenings later, shortly before 8 o'clock, she came back to the office and said she had had an urgent wire from Paris and that she had to go over that night. She hoped to be back in about a week, but she would not keep the rooms on, as she was not certain of her plans. I made out the bill, and what brings the thing back to my mind is that I had to charge her for that night in accordance with her rule. She didn't seem to mind. the way some people do it in such a case. She left then, and I never saw her since. This being all the pretty clerk could tell him, French asked next to see the chambermaid who had attended number 137 on the night in question. From this woman he at first learned nothing. For a quarter of an hour he prompted fruitlessly. Then, just as in the case of the clerk, a chance word brought a ray of light. Asked if she could remember having seen luggage with Olympic labels and the name Mrs. Root, she suddenly admitted that she could. Her attention had been attracted by the name Root, as she had been reading the papers of a distinguished American of the same name, and she had wondered if the owner of the luggage was any connection. She remembered the luggage distinctly. There were two big, new-looking American trunks, labeled on steamer labels, Mrs. Something Root. Yes, she thought it was Chauncey. Something like that anyway, some queer foreign name that only an American would bear. She thought she remembered the luggage. The chambermaid could not recall anything about the lady herself. After fruitlessly interrogating several other of the hotel servants, French retreated into a deserted corner of the lounge and set himself to think the thing out. And presently it occurred to him that the trunks might represent a clue. Did their removal not involve a taxi, and if so, could he find it? He went back to the head porter to make inquiries. Vehicles were usually obtained from the rank and the street adjoining. Of course, it frequently happened that a driver looking for a fare would pass at this critical moment and be employed, but 7 out of 10 were obtained from the rank. French left the hotel and, sauntering down to the cab rank, engaged the driver of the leading car in conversation. All the taxis of the rank, the man stated, were the property of one firm, Metropolitan Transport Limited. The men returned the runs they had made on their daily journals, and French could, if he chose to apply to the office in Victoria Street, learn all there was to be known about it. French did choose, and a quarter of an hour later was in conversation with the manager. But that gentleman was dubious that he could supply the desired information. It was true they kept a pretty complete record of the runs made, and these had to balance with the reading of the meters and with the money handed in, but obviously no note was made of the names or description of the fares. He could find out if a car had gone from the Savoy to Victoria about 7:45 p.m. on the night of the 26th November, but he could not say who might have travelled in it. If you could let me have a note of the cars which left the hotel between 7:40 and 8:10, irrespective of their destination, I should be obliged, French declared. I could see all the drivers, and possibly some of them might remember the woman. I can give you that, the manager assented, but it will take a little time to get out. He rang for a clerk and gave the necessary instruction, then leaned back in his chair and went on conversationally. What's the trouble? Is it indiscreet to ask? French smiled benevolently. Certainly not, he assured the other. I'll tell you the whole thing. We believe that the lady I'm after is a crook, a diamond thief. She gave out that she was the wife of a wealthy American steel magnate, but we believe she is no more that than you are. She left the hotel that night with 2 trunks and some small luggage to go to Paris by the 8:20 from Victoria and has vanished. I'm trying now to trace her. The manager seemed interested. Well, he said, that's a useful hint you have given now. Our drivers record the luggage, that is, outside luggage for which there is a charge. It'll narrow the thing down a bit if we have only to count the vehicles with 2 packages outside. That's a point, French admitted, and a good one. But I only know that there were 2 large trunks besides hand luggage. There might have been more than 2 packages outside. It's not likely. If there was only one lady, she could have taken the hand stuff in with her. Ah, here's the list. From the tabulated sheet handed to the manager, it appeared that between the hours 7:40 and 8:10 on the night in question, no less than 28 taxis had left the Savoy. Of these, 20 had gone to theatres. Of the remaining 8, 2 had gone to Euston, 1 to King's Cross, 1 to Hampstead, 1 to Kensington, and 3 to Victoria. Pointing the second to Victoria. See and extras. 2 packages. That's what you want. It looked as if the manager was right. The first of the 3 vehicles to Victoria had no outside luggage, and the third was a party of 5. Number 2 had left at 7:55 with 1 passenger and 2 outside packages. It's promising enough, French admitted. If you could tell me where to find the driver of that car, I should be much obliged. John Straker. The manager picked up his desk telephone. Where is John Straker at present? He called, and in a moment to French, "He's out at work. He's on the stand beside the Savoy, and if you go there now and don't mind waiting, you will see him. I'll give you a note to him. It'll make him more ready to talk. He's a peculiar looking man, clean shaven, with a thin white face and hooked nose and very black eyes. You'll recognize him at once. Better take this time book also. It may bring the trip back to his memory." French, having thanked the manager, returned to the cab rank. As he walked down and glancing at the drivers, a taxi drove up and took its place at the tail of the line. Its driver answered the description, and when he had switched off his engine and seemed at liberty, French accosted him and explained his business. For some seconds the man pondered, scratching his head and turning over the leaves of his time book. At last he looked at French. "I remember the trip," he said. "It's a strange thing, but that was the only trip I made to Victoria that week. It's a place we are at pretty often, as you'll understand. But I remember going that night. It was with a lady, and she had 2 big boxes. I remember them because they were rather big for the space on the car, but I got them fixed up all right." "Where did you go to?" "I believe the main line departure side of Victoria, though I'm not just certain." "Good," said French heartily. "Now, could you describe the lady?" This, however, was beyond the driver's powers. He had not noticed her especially, nor could he describe the porter who had taken the luggage. But French had not expected that. Indeed, he was surprised and delighted at having got so much. The rest of that day, and most of the next, he spent at Victoria interviewing porters, inspectors, ticket collectors, and any other officials he could find who might by chance have seen the quarry. But nowhere had he any luck. The unknown remained unknown. As he continued turning the matter over in his mind, a further possible clue in connection with the trunks occurred to him. They were large. They could not be taken in the carriage. It was nearly certain, therefore, that they must have been registered through. Were there records, he wondered, of such registration? He went to the registration office and saw the clerk in charge. Yes, there were records. They were kept for a while and then destroyed. He could, with little trouble, turn up those for the New Haven boat train on the 26th November, and he could certainly do so to oblige the inspector. But the records, when at last they were produced, revealed neither the name of Mrs. Root nor the fact that anyone had registered 2 large trunks by that train. French discussed the possibility of those in question having been taken unregistered. It seemed that this was possible, but most unlikely. In any case, had it been done, the clerk believed the customs people would have noted it, but it would take some time to find out. "Don't trouble about it," French told him, "at least not in the meantime." Suppose this woman crook was impersonating Mrs. Root, as he believed she was, would she not, as soon as she had disposed of the diamonds, seek to vanish and to resume a real personality? If so, did this not involve getting rid of the trunks? Did she really require them, or had they served their purpose when they reached Victoria? As a forlorn hope, he decided he would act on this idea. Suppose she wanted to get rid of them, how would she do it? There were several ways, but he felt satisfied that the easiest and best would be simply to leave them in the left luggage office. A considerable time would elapse before any question would arise about them, and it would then probably only take the form of their being opened by the railway company and their contents sold for what they would bring. He went round to the left luggage office and propounded this inquiry, and immediately he received a pleasant surprise. The clerk to whom he was referred smiled, and turning over some papers, pointed to an item. It read, 2 large American trunks, white star labels SS Olympic. Mrs. Chauncey S. Root, passenger to Southampton. "Bit of luck for you, sir," the clerk remarked. "I was looking over the list only today and I noticed the item. Boxes were left on the 26th of last month and have not been claimed. I want to open them and perhaps take them to the yard." The necessary authority was soon obtained, and French followed the clerk to a huge room stored with luggage of all descriptions. Calling the porter in charge, they were conducted to a corner in which stood 2 large boxes, and French, looking at the labels, found they were those of which he was in search. "Pull those out, George," the clerk directed, "so as this gentleman can open them, and let him take them away if he wants to." "That all you want, sir?" French, left to himself, began by satisfying himself that the handwriting of the labels was the same as that of the checks. Then, Taking a bunch of skeleton keys from his pockets, he set to work on the locks. In a few moments, both stood open. For a space, he stood staring down in amazement at their contents. They were full of blankets, just new, thin blankets of a poor, cheap quality. They were fairly tightly packed and completely filled the trunks. He took out the blankets and, opening each out, shook it to make that no small articles were concealed in the folds. But there was nothing. Nor was there any smooth surface within the empty trunks upon which finger impressions might have been left. They were lined with canvas, fine as to quality, but still too rough to carry prints. Inspector French felt more puzzled and baffled than ever. What under the sun were the blankets for? And where was the woman who had carried them aboard? He was certainly no further on as to finding her, whether she had crossed to France, or travelled to some other point on the southern system, or had simply walked out of the station and been swallowed up in the wilderness of London. She was just as completely lost to him as ever. Hard luck that so unexpected a lift as the finding of the trunks should have led to so little. But there was one thing it had led to. It settled the question of the impersonation. On no other hypothesis could the abandonment of the trunks be explained. A point of which he had already thought recurred to him. If the unknown had impersonated Mrs. Root, she either knew her or knew a great deal about her. The chances, therefore, were that Mrs. Root knew the unknown. It also seemed pretty certain that Mrs. X, as he began to call the unknown in his mind, had really crossed in the Olympic. How else she obtained the labels and the dinner menu? Granted these two probabilities, it almost certainly followed that the real Mrs. Root and Mrs. X had met on board. If so, would it not be worthwhile interviewing Mrs. Root in the hope that she might by method of elimination, suggest the names of one or more persons who might have carried out the trick, and thus provide French with another point of attack? Thinking it would be worthwhile to investigate the matter, he returned to the yard and sent a cable to the Pittsburgh police asking them to obtain Mrs. Root's present address. He glanced at his watch. It was not yet 5 o'clock, and he saw that he would have time to make another call before going off duty. 15 minutes later, he pushed open the door of Dashford's Inquiry Agency in Suffolk Street off the Strand. "Mr. Parker in?" he demanded of the bright young lady who came to the counter, continuing in response to a request for his name. "Inspector French from the yard, but Mr. Parker's an old friend, and I'll just go right in." The girl eyed him doubtfully as he passed through the counter and, crossing the office, tapped at a door in the farther wall. Without waiting for a reply, he pushed the door open and passed within, shutting it behind him. Writing at a desk in the center of the room was an enormously stout man. He did not look up, but grunted impatiently. "Well?" "Well yourself," French grunted, mimicking the other's tone. The fat man looked up, then a smile dawned on his rubicund countenance, and he got heavily to his feet and held out a huge hand. "Why, Joe, old son, I'm glad to see you. It's a long time since you blew in. Bring the chair around to the fire and let's hear the news." French did as he was told, as he answered, "All's well, Tom? Busy?" "Not too busy for a chat with you. How's the yard?" "The yard's going strong. Same old 6 and 8 pence. I often think you did wisely to chuck it up and start in here. More your boss, eh?" The fat man shook his head. "I don't know," he said slowly, handing a tobacco pouch to his visitor. "I don't know. More your own boss perhaps, but more worry. If you don't get jobs here, you didn't get your pay and no pension at the end except the interest on what you save up. I've thought of that pension many a time since I left." "Rubbish!" French exclaimed genially as he filled his pipe. "You're too young to be talking of pensions. I was here looking for you about a week ago, but you were in Scotland." "Yes, I was at the Munro case, acting for old Munro. I think he'll pull it off." "I dare say." The talk drifted on. Then French turned it to the object of his call. "I'm on a case that you people have had a finger in. I wish you'd tell me what you can about it. It's that business of Mrs. Root of Pittsburgh that Williams and Davies of Coxby Street put you on to 6 weeks ago. They wanted you to find out what she was like and if she crossed by the Olympic." "Ah," said the fat man. "Well, we told them. I handled it myself." "Did they tell you why they wanted to know?" "No, only asked the question." That's where they made the mistake. A woman called on Williams, saying she was Mrs. Root and had crossed by the Olympic. She said she had lost her dispatch case with a passport and tickets and money, and she wanted a loan of £3,000 on the security of diamonds she had in her trunk. Well, was it not right? It was perfectly right so far. Williams was satisfied from what you told him that she was the woman, and he lent the money. French paused, smiling, and his friend swore. Confounded man, can't you get on? Were the stones paste? Not at all. They took them to Strong and Hurst of Strong's, and he valued them. They were perfectly all right, worth 3,300 odd pounds. French paused and became very impressive. They were all stolen from Duke and Peabody the night before. The fat man was visibly impressed. He stared fixedly at French, as he might had that philosopher turn into Mrs. Root before his eye. Then, heavily, he smote his thigh. Jehoshaphat, he observed slowly. The night before. Some crook that. Tell me. That's about all there is to tell, French declared. The woman arrived at the Savoy about 8 o'clock the night before, ostensibly from the Olympic, and she left next night and has vanished. No clue so far. I traced her to Victoria and there lost the trail. The fat man thought profoundly. If Williams and Davies want to blame us for it, they can look elsewhere, he presently announced. They asked us a question, and we gave them a correct and immediate reply. I know that, French agreed. Williams asked you the wrong question. Mrs. Root was impersonated. At least that's my theory. But what I wanted to know from you was how you got your information. Between ourselves, are you satisfied about it? The fat man shook his fist good-humouredly. Now, young man, he advised, don't you get fresh with me. But I'll tell you, he went on, suddenly grave. It was through Pinkertons. We have an arrangement with them. I cabled the New York depot, and they got the information. I knew it would be all right, French answered, but I was curious to know how you worked. The two men chatted for some time. Then French said he must go. Half an hour later, he reached his house, and with a sigh of relief at the thought of his slippers and his armchair, let himself in. The end of chapter 10.